Hi, my name's Kevin Hicks. Welcome to my YouTube channel, The History Squad. Now, today's video is about Jon Snow. Not Jon Snow of the Game of Thrones. You know nothing, Jon Snow. This is about Dr. Jon Snow, who is an expert in epidemiology. In other words, he studied epidemics. And what we're focusing on is the cholera outbreak in London in the 1800s. 1854 was the one that he really focused on, and he managed to stop it pretty much in its tracks. So let's have a little look, before we go into the whole subject, let's have a little look at what cholera actually is. Prepare yourself, it's not pleasant. Cholera, from the Greek word cholera, which was with a K, it simply means diarrhea. So we're going to talk about a subject which is full of I can't say the word, can I? It's pooping. We're talking about the epidemic that hit London 1854. There have been cases previous. It came out, the disease apparently came out of India and then later on from Afghanistan and spread across Europe and made its way finally to London. The symptoms: you will feel a bit faint, sweaty. It can take a day to 6 days to actually incubate inside your body. You could be walking along the street and all of a sudden your body completely, it evacuates itself. You then have chronic attacks of diarrhea. You're incredibly thirsty. You'll be trying to take water. Your body will reject it. Eventually just water. And so I've read the membrane lining of your intestines will be pooped out. You're going to die. So you combine this with the poverty in the Soho area of London where this outbreak had taken place. 54 people lived in one house. There were workshops, factories, workhouse, churches, all these different things all crammed in. They called it the rookeries. And of course there was no proper sewage system. People still relied on cesspits. Now a cesspit, it's basically a hole dug in the ground. You poop into it. Hopefully the poop will rot away. If not, the cesspit fills up, has to be emptied. We didn't know where they drained. They weren't mapped. The stench around these places was disgusting. And that was one of the ideas, that it was spread by bad air. It was miasmic, so bad air carries disease. But Dr. Jon Snow lived near the area and he totally disagreed with the miasmic theory. His angle was this: it's in the intestine. If it's in the intestine, it's got to be ingested. You can't breathe it into the intestine. That goes to the lungs. But unfortunately for him, that people didn't believe. But his theory, he was going to have a hard uphill struggle to prove that it was not miasmic, that it was through contaminated water. And the way he did it was brilliant. So this Dr. Jon Snow was convinced that it was contaminated water that was spreading this disease. I've got some of his own writings here, and it's talking about within 250 yards of the spot where Cambridge Street joins Broad Street, where there is a pump, there were upwards of 500 fatal attacks, all of cholera, and within 10 days. So that is massive, isn't it? And this is what he wrote: as soon as I became acquainted with the situation and the extent of this eruption of cholera, I suspected some contamination of the water of the much frequented street pump in Broad Street. Now, I've learned something about this pump. Yeah, I've got one here. Yeah, this is one out of my garden, so it's only a little one. The big public ones in London were enormous. People liked the flavour, the taste of the water. When you pumped it, it was crystal clear. And Dr. Jon Snow actually took a sample of it and it's crystal clear. But within 2 days, there were silver flecks within it. This is the bacteria. This is the cholera. But people liked the taste of the water from the Broad Street pump. People would come from miles to take some of that water, and there's a bit of a link here to how it was eventually proved it was the Broad Street pump. The way Dr. John Snow went about to prove his theory that this was contaminated water and not miasmic spread through the air was he was going to map all of the cases of people who died of the cholera. And he went literally from door to door. And as he maps around the area, he goes to the workhouse, 535 inmates in the workhouse, possibly some of my wife's relatives, but they had their own well. They had no cases of cholera. They also, when their well was running short, they got water from elsewhere, not from the Broad Street pump. There was a coffee house that had people who'd been drinking there, what they call sherbet. Well, it's actually fizzy water. And the water for this fizzy drink was from the Broad Street pump. They went to a factory where 16 folks had died of the cholera. Every morning, they filled up 2 tubs of water from the Broad Street pump. So there was a brewery nearby on Broad Street, and there'd been nobody had fallen foul of the cholera. And when John Snow inquired, they said, oh, no, we've got our own well here. But anyway, nobody drinks water here. They drink beer, malt liquor. Nobody's died. So he puts all of this information together, puts it on a map, presents it to the local authorities. Dr. John Snow managed to convince the local authorities to simply remove the handle from the Broad Street pump. Now, this outbreak was already on its decline, but once the handle was removed from the Broad Street pump, it finished it dead. But Dr. John Snow was not finished. He continued to interview people who'd lost loved ones to this terrible cholera outbreak. And he learnt of 2 ladies who died of the cholera from outside of his area. So he went to interview the brother of one of the ladies who died, because he was, how come they've got cholera so far out of the area? So when he goes there, he finds out that this man tells him, oh yeah, my auntie used to live in Broad Street and she moved out here for the clearer air, but she missed the taste of the water from the Broad Street pump, so she had it brought in bottles, and that's what she and his sister had drunk and caught the cholera, and it had killed them both. But there were still so many people who were against Dr. John Snow's theory that this was contaminated water. The popular belief that it was miasmic, it was the disgusting air that spread the disease. And the Reverend Henry Whitehead decided he would prove once and for all that John Snow was wrong. And it was he who interviewed the very first case, or the woman who was involved in the very first case of cholera in that area. It was her baby who had contracted the disease outside of the area. She brought the baby home, and when she washed the nappies or the diapers, she tipped the water into the cesspit, which just so happened to be 3 feet from the Broad Street pump well. Now, other people in the house contracted the cholera. This is how easy it spread. The poop dries, dust, people inhale it, or they ingest it, should I say. But the people who lived at the back of the house, don't forget about the overcrowding, was it 54 people in one house in this area? They tipped their waste water, their diarrhea water, at the back of the house, and it drained in a different direction. But this lady's husband contracted cholera and died. And to get rid of his filth, they simply tipped the waste out into the cesspit. So they investigated. They opened the cesspit, and sure enough, it's in disrepair. And in the one side, there is a crack. So they remove the pump off the Broad Street well. They have a look down inside, and there is a crack and a seepage of brown sludge running into the water. The diarrhea from the baby and the unfortunate father had leaked into the water supply. Cholera. And it also accounts for the nice pleasant taste that they had in the Broad Street pump water. People really liked it. So it will take another 4 years for the argument about reforming the sewers of London to roll on. It was 1858, the year of the great stink in London, that things changed, when Parliament would get behind the idea that perhaps London needs proper sewers. But something else came out of this. Dr. John Snow's approach to this terrible, terrible cholera outbreak, it was track and trace. The way he mapped things, the way he interviewed people about who died, where did they get the water from. You think about recent pandemics that we've had, track and trace. It was important. And it all begins really with Dr. John Snow. And you know, in the history books, it's just a little page. It's just one section about him, not a chapter or anything like that. And then ironically, he's buried in Brompton Cemetery in London. He didn't live very long, bless him. And in the Second World War, his grave received, I think, a direct hit because his memorial was blown to pieces. But there is a new one on the site now, and it is the memorial to John Snow, because let's face it, that man, very important. His work still affects us to this very day. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. Bit of a mucky subject, but important. If you did, like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the all notification buttons, because we have so many different subjects, you don't know what's coming on down the line. But before I go, a mention of some of my Patreons: Zachary Miller, Sean Kahan and Mika S. Hey guys, thanks a bunch. Bye for now.